So reuse, I would say Linux and Salt are the two big ones. So Linux we've been doing a little bit longer. So before I was focused more on open source by itself, I was on the team that ported a lot of our stuff over to work on Linux back in 2011, 2012. So for probably 5 years now, we've had like Linux real-time offerings in the market with cRIO and CompactDAQ. So that's probably our most substantial in the field example of reuse. And what really that comes down to is we had two real-time operating systems, which you don't really need to know what that means, but we had two real-time operating systems that were on some of our devices. One of them we bought from a company. It's called VxWorks. And we bought from a company that actually got bought by Intel called Wind River. And the other we got from another company. It's called Farlap. But basically, the company that had that, I don't know all the details, but ended up becoming kind of our real-time operating system. And so we had our kind of in-house option for some of our devices, and we have our purchased option for some of our devices. Meanwhile, Linux is over here becoming a better and better and better operating system and a better and better real-time option as well, because that's a specific kind of narrow need that most people don't care about. But for control and automation, real-time is important, which basically just means if I need something to happen by a certain time.
Like in future?
Yeah, it's not about speed, it's really just about predictability. Okay, do I know that if something happens, I can respond to it within a certain amount of time, every time? That's really what real-time comes down to.
That makes sense.
And so Linux grew to be able to solve that problem. And so all of a sudden we had an in-house thing we were maintaining and a thing we were buying. And there's this free thing over here. Meanwhile, we actually need to make one of our operating systems support a completely new kind of hardware, which was the ARM processor for the new cRIOs that were coming out at the time. And so we had to make a decision. Do we take our in-house one and make it support ARM, which would be a lot of work? Do we take the one we bought and use its ability and keep paying for licenses for that software? Or do we make Linux work for our hardware? And we decided to do Linux, which enabled us to reuse all their stuff, not pay for a proprietary one, not build one completely in-house, and reuse the massive ecosystem around Linux, and enable customers, like specifically like Airbus. We have a really cool customer who's working on Factory of the Future stuff, and they're leveraging a lot of sort of advanced Linux technologies on those devices that were not possible before. So I would say Linux is the best example of reuse that we have, which basically just means Linux was there, it was available for us to use, we just had to actually take the time to integrate it into our platform so that we could, one, avoid buying an alternative, avoid owning our own in-house thing that we invented and having to invest in that. And then Salt is another example, but I think Linux is maybe a better one just because we've been doing that longer and it's actually in the field in a lot of devices right now.
That sounds great. Can you give an example of a device? You said Airbus.
So there I can give an example of specific products that we have. So the first one we did was the CompactRIO 9068, which was running the ARM processor I talked about. So it was a cRIO, and then we did follow-on DAC devices. The MyRIO also is one of them. So an academic product runs Linux, which obviously, since it's an academic setting,
especially makes sense.
Especially makes sense, exactly. And then students who are learning embedded programming, things like that, have all the bells and whistles of a Linux system to play with. It's all over the place now. It's in more devices than I can name. We're planning for it to go into all of our PXI controllers or all of our real-time PXI controllers. And I'd have to check, but it also is in one of our FlexRIO controllers. It's kind of sprinkled all over the place.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess dealing with competition, so I can talk about the RT collaborative project since I'll be using Linux here, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add onto this, more so than that sentence? I can also do my own research.
Yeah, okay, so this is kind of a big topic, this use open source to commoditize an area of software so we can move the competition to where we're strong. That's something that is in that essay I mentioned, the Magic Cauldron. I don't know if you want to go into that because it's kind of like, it's a big rabbit trail. It's really interesting, but it's a big rabbit trail. So you might just want to not get into that. But I don't know that that's really what we did here. Maybe it kind of is. But the idea is, it's kind of like if... well, okay, let me think of something where let's say
Do you recommend taking it out of the article? Do you think it'd add like?
I think it's too much.
aspects?
I don't think people would get it.
Okay.
It requires a certain amount of
Understanding already with OSS.
Well, and it requires more of the reader than I think we might could expect. Because it's almost like it needs almost an analogy for people to even understand, which is what I was about to try to think of. Like, you could say, all right, there's a food truck over there, and that guy's selling, let's say, hot dogs, and maybe someone else comes up with a food truck, and he's also selling hot dogs, but his are better. It's like, well, okay, maybe his are better because his source is better. Well, what if then the way I solve the problem is or the way I try to compete with them is by saying, all right, let's take that off the table by making it so that we both have access to the same free hot dogs that are of the same quality. Then now we have to compete on some other basis, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's on condiments, maybe it's on service, whatever.
Yeah.
That's open source kind of does that. You can use open source as a competitive weapon by basically intentionally commoditizing something where you're weak, and then all of a sudden any competitors who are differentiating on the basis of that thing no longer can do that because it's free now. And so now what the nature of your competition with them might disappear, or it might shift to somewhere else. And there's examples of companies that have done this, but in our case it makes sense to shift. It shifts the competition to a lot of our hardware offerings, and the polish and the fit and finish of our devices, which is an area where we're extremely strong. So, yeah, excuse me, but yeah, we don't need to differentiate so much on the closed nature of our real-time behavior. Everybody can do real-time behavior now. We should take advantage of the best-in-class things we can from like Linux RT. But what we're really doing is kind of taking the whole argument about which real-time operating system is the best one to use off the table, because one, we have the best one, and two, it's free, and able to move the discussion to like, what's the best hardware to solve your problem? Oh yeah, it's ours. So whatever competitor you're using that's offering some other, maybe they're using a proprietary real-time operating system, we've just kind of decimated the perceived value of what they're giving.
Makes sense.
So yeah, like I said, I say all that to explain it,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you want to go into it.
I don't know if I could encapsulate that in a very short blurb.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the
exactly.
things I've learned from doing Ion and I, because I'm a journalism major, so I'm used to kind of writing longer pieces. But at Ion and I has been very like big heading, 2 sentences, big heading, 2 sentences, because it's more of like a scanning document.
Exactly.
So
That's kind of what I'm thinking as you talk about it. Like I don't think we could get into that. I think we could talk about, when I think I wrote it to kind of be one of those kind of documents
and it's
of
really
like,
great.
here's a concept, here's an example, here's a concept, here's an example, or whatever. So
No, you did a really great job. I think like your email was really like a push for us. Like, oh wow, this is definitely something we should cover, because nobody on the team had any idea any of this is going on.
yeah, and that's the other thing is there have actually been conversations between engineers here where somebody would be kind of bummed. They'd be like, man, I wish we did more with open source. And someone would be like, what are you talking about? We did all this stuff. And he's like, and by the time they get done with the conversation, it's like, oh, I feel really great now. This is actually pretty cool. I didn't realize that. Thanks. Scott Salmon, who's an engineer, he did a presentation basically just trying to make that point a couple years ago at NI Tech. So yeah, I look at this as we should leverage the value of what we've already done, in our outbound and inbound materials, because it's already happened. It's not like I'm asking for resources. It's just saying, hey, look at the value we're creating. So.
Let's see. Oh yeah, and then the presentation that you kind of talked about a couple times, could you possibly send those to me and I can read through them myself as well?
Yeah. So I had one on the rise of open source, and I had another one on, and then I mentioned that essay.
Yeah.
I can do it.
They both sound perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you. So I popped this into here. So you talked about To-Do earlier as well, about all the different companies that come together.
Yeah.
I think you gave enough information here to like.
Yeah, that
make
goes
that
back to
happen?
like the Linux Foundation is kind of an umbrella organization that has lots of mini little projects underneath it. So one of them is that RT project that we're involved in. We're donating money to that to help RT Linux continue to be healthy.
Okay.
We and like a dozen other companies are doing that. And that's giving us connections with people in industry who care about this and experts on it and all that's great. And it's ensuring we can continue to provide the value we provide.
Okay.
To-do group's interesting because that's also under the Linux Foundation, but it's basically just if you have someone who is leading the open source part of your organization, they can go to this, and it's a cool opportunity to see how people are doing this at other companies and share ideas, share tools that we write or whatever.
Okay.
So yeah.
Do you think if this is an article, should I go into detail about what To-Do is, or should it be like, hey, if you want to see what other companies are also doing, you can check out To-Do? What would be the better way to like kind of put that in there?
The weird thing about it is To-Do exists for to-do and not for you. Like
Okay.
it's not something I would call to action people to go look
Yeah.
at because it's like it's not there for them.
Okay.
It's almost like if Alec Davern was in some sort of group where the CEOs met to talk about like
not be
how to be a
useful
good
for,
CEO. Like
everybody else.
it would be good for us maybe to know that he's doing that he's sharing knowledge and learning from other people who are in his field doing his job. But yeah, it's like whatever.
makes sense.
The main reason I mentioned it is because I got to name drop Guido van Rossum, like the guy who invented Python, which is the most popular programming language in the world.
Yeah.
And getting to meet people who are doing this at other companies that I know everybody's heard of, and just the fact that like we're on their level, right?
Yeah.
Like I presented to all of them and we talked a lot, and I had a good conversation with people from Google and GitHub and others about how they work, and so just kind of like that community of tech companies, and it was a cool opportunity to sort of see that connection. But yeah, mainly.
That is really cool. I'm glad that you got to do that.
Yeah, mainly it's just it was a cool experience, and I think it's because of what we're doing with open source that we're able to do that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Let's see. So you talked a little bit about SaltStack already.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I can pull something from there already. And
Yeah,
then,
there's a really interesting reuse angle there,
Okay.
which is the sort of the way I put it. This isn't a great analogy, but the way I put it is, we needed to have systems management capability. It has systems management capability, but it didn't have some major things that we needed. And so at first blush, we were like, no, this isn't going to work for us. But then when we looked at it again, we were like, well, if we just added to it to make it do the stuff that it can't do that we need, then what we would get out of it would be greater than what we would have gotten if we did something all by ourselves, like way greater. So it was almost like we had we had 1,000 puzzle pieces, and we only needed 400 of them, but we were missing 100. And so we had to go make our own 100 puzzle pieces. But then once we did that, those ones that we didn't need are really useful for all sorts of capabilities that we would never have kind of necessarily envisioned or created on our own, because we wouldn't have made the investment up front. So, yeah, SaltStack's interesting in that way because it's like the decision to reuse initially was discouraged by the fact that it didn't solve 100% of our problems. But then once we acknowledge, well, it solves 80% of our problems, let's implement the other 20% and send them back to, like, part of the thing that was interesting there is, how do we know, one of the things about open source is, you want the community to work with you. You want them to accept your changes. You want to be aligned, right?
Yeah.
We want to know that where SaltStack is going is where we're going. And so we talked to them before we started using their stuff. We talked to the people who kind of are most involved there and said, like, if we made this support Windows and support our use cases for embedded devices or whatever, would that fit with what y'all are doing? And they said yes, absolutely. So that helped us to pull the trigger and make the call. And we've submitted some stuff. And there was a link. The response from the community is awesome because it's a link to where we submitted support for Windows for Salt. We implemented that and submitted it to them, and you can see on GitHub, which is basically like social networking for development.
Yeah.
The response from them was like, this is awesome. They're like kudoing it like crazy. So it's like a really good example of a positive interaction with the community that benefits us and them.
That's actually really helpful. I'll probably go in and like pull some of the screenshots from there and stuff like that.
Yeah, that might be good. And it also highlights a particular employee, Sergey, who's awesome.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I will make sure to do that.